What is Prader-Willi syndrome? Don't you hate that question? And I've taken to responding by saying, well, do you want the 3-minute answer or the 3-day answer? Because really, it's so difficult. And I think we all start at the same place, which is greatly underestimating the complexity of this syndrome. I don't know if you've ever heard the legend of the Indian legend of the 6 blind men approaching the elephant. And this image has come up spontaneously so many times in my discussions with people about this syndrome. But the first blind man took hold of the elephant's trunk and said, "Ah, an elephant is like a snake." And the second one took hold of his tusk and said, "Oh, an elephant is like a spear." And the third one took hold of the elephant's ear and said, "An elephant is like a fan." And the next one took hold of his leg and said, "An elephant is like a tree." And the next one felt the elephant's side, and he said, "The elephant is like a wall." And the last one took hold of the elephant's tail and said, "An elephant is clearly just like a rope." Here's our elephant. We in the field, as both I think as parents, providers, and especially as medical professionals, sometimes see only part of the elephant, and it's very hard to stand back and see the whole elephant. Give you a minute to absorb some of the things that have been said to you over the years. Does this sound familiar? Okay, but you've probably heard the word hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is, as you can see, I want to show you, to point out that this is a cutaway brain. That is, the right hemisphere is present on this brain, and the blue part are the ventricle system, which is where the fluid in the brain belongs and is. And the yellow piece is the hypothalamus. And what I want to point out is how centrally it's located. And it really is a kind of relay station for a lot of other brain functions. And this is a partial explanation of why this syndrome is so complex. And then in this blown up version, the green is the hypothalamus, and it has tracks running especially through the parts of the brain that are involved in modulating things, in regulating things. So it's your command control center for the brain. And as you've probably heard, or even figured out for yourselves, some of the functions of the hypothalamus have to do with appetite and satiety. Satiety is a word meaning a sense of fullness, what tells you to stop eating. Emotional regulation, no big surprise there. Temperature regulation, relatively unimportant, but becomes an issue in cold weather. Alertness and sleep, hormones, puberty, sex drive, memory. But it's the first two that we'll be focusing on mostly today, because these are the functions whose malfunction changes your entire lives and changes your child's entire life, and that is what you are dealing with continuously. So I want to break things down a little bit. I want you to think that Prader-Willi syndrome requires 3 different things with respect to weight management. You have to control the weight. You also have to control the calories, and you have to control the food. Separate them out in your mind. Why is weight control so important? The child really needs to be at or near ideal body weight, and I just want to define this for you. Ideal body weight is based on height, and so all you do is you take the child's height, you go over and find what age child has that height, an average, and then you drop down to the weight chart and you find the average weight for that age child. So if your child's height age is 10, even though he's 12, you want to look for an average weight for a 10-year-old, not an average weight for a 12-year-old. this is just in your handout so that you've seen this, but you'll sometimes hear people talk about BMI, body mass index. It's another way of doing this. It's more appropriate for adults, but in children, the BMI, what's an appropriate BMI at an early age, maybe of about 15, would be underweight for an adult, and appropriate adult BMI would be extremely overweight in a child. As you can see, the adult who has a BMI of 20 is well in the nice range of weight, but that would be right off the scale for a child. There's a vague general understanding that obesity isn't good for you. But I want to point out that the problem with obesity for people with Prader-Willi syndrome is really a little different than what it is for the rest of us. For the rest of us, typical obesity, basically it's associated with high cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes, and all of these lead to vascular disease, atherosclerosis. And that leads to the things that do us in. Heart attack, stroke, heart failure, things like that. However, vascular disease takes a long time to develop. And basically, you don't expect to hear about people having these symptoms, usually, until they get into their 40s and 50s, even in 60s and 70s. So most people think of obesity as a long-term problem. And I have to say, insurance companies tend to think of obesity as a long-term problem. No big problem immediately. However, Prader-Willi syndrome is different. Remember that floppy baby. The hypotonia, I think, among other things, contributes to a problem with obesity with Prader-Willi syndrome. And the connection is that the reason the children are hypotonic or floppy is that the muscle size is actually reduced. It seems to be fairly normal muscle. As far as anyone has been able to tell, the muscle is actually functioning fine, but the mass of the muscle is reduced. And the effect is that when someone is overweight, and this is an individual who's very overweight, but the chest x-ray shows the point very well. If you look at the chest wall, the distance between the ribs and out to the dark area outside the person's body, there's several inches of fat there. And just like a telephone book, a thick telephone book does not bend, it's stiff. A thin telephone book or a piece of paper bends very easily. It takes more work to move this chest in and out. And even a small amount of obesity leads to decreased breathing or hypoventilation, and that leads to right heart failure. And together they lead to respiratory failure. That is, the child who simply cannot breathe well enough to meet his basic needs. And this can occur at any age. And we've seen it in a life-threatening situation as early as age 3 to 4. So people's thinking about the obesity needs to change, because we don't think of obesity as a life-threatening problem for young children or teenagers. We think of it as a life-threatening problem for 30 and 40 and 50-year-olds. In the meantime, yes, it's possible for people with Prader-Willi syndrome to have high cholesterol, high blood pressure, and diabetes from their obesity. But relatively speaking, that's a sideshow, which is why I put the arrow over on the side. Because the main event, the main issue, is this hypoventilation. There are people who have mild obesity who start to have these other problems as the years go on. But the most urgent problem is to avoid this underlying breathing abnormality. So, how fat is too fat? This is a graph, and each point on this graph is a child. And the normal weights are in the black line. And the red line is basically where you might see obese children who don't have Prader-Willi syndrome. So all of these children are way off the scale. Typically, that line that's marked 40, where a lot of them are clustered, is roughly twice their desirable weight. They are roughly twice what they should, and as you can see, some of them are pushing 3 times what they should. The children with the green triangles are children who are showing signs, clear signs of abnormal oxygenation during the night. And the children with the yellow squares have abnormal oxygenation both during the night and during the day. So they're really quite ill. And the last group are children who were in an intensive care unit or had some sort of critical illness as a result of their obesity. Now there's good news and bad news contained in this graph. On the one hand, the fact that the children were getting into medical trouble did sneak up on their families and on their doctors as well, because they didn't recognize the effect that the weight was having on the children's breathing. But the good news is none of these children was just a little overweight. Now there is research that shows that you can see, if you look for it, increased abnormalities in breathing at any weight, even normal weight, and it starts to get worse no matter at any increase in the weight. That is, it's a continuum. But the seriously ill children really were quite obese. Nevertheless, these families and these doctors were taken by surprise, and that's why I think it's worthwhile to describe this to a general audience. I'm not trying to scare you. So what happens is the breathing problems worsen with increasing weight. They are insidious. They sneak up on you. They begin during sleep, and they lead to right heart failure at any age if the obesity is bad enough. And this is a critically ill boy at age 9. And since I showed you that scary picture, I just want you to know he did extremely well, and this is only 6 months later. Well, the next issue is calorie control. Why do we have to control the calories so carefully? Well, weight management consists of energy in has to equal energy out. For a growing child, it's the same because the child uses energy to grow. Our calorie control is absolutely amazing. The more I look at Prader-Willi Syndrome and what I like to call normal obesity, the more impressed I am with really how good the brain is in the rest of us. And somebody nicknamed it the apostat, like a thermostat, because it's a very, very delicate instrument. Let's say that you ate 50 calories a day more than you burn consistently. And the fact is, we probably do this fairly consistently. 50 calories a day is half a slice of bread, non-diet bread. Half an apple. Now, I don't know about you, but I think the most compulsive calorie counter is not going to detect a 50 calorie a day excess. And yet, for the typical person who is maintaining their weight, in fact, their brain is precisely doing that for them. If you take 50 calories a day, more or less, consistently, over 365 days, it comes out to 18,250 calories per year, but you knew that. 18,250 calories a year divided by the number of calories it takes to gain 1 pound of fat comes out to roughly 5 pounds per year. Now, 5 pounds per year is 52 pounds in every 10 years. Think about it. Very few people, even those of us who are overweight, even people who are quite overweight, do not gain 5 pounds of weight a year, or everybody would be weighing 200, 300 pounds by the time you're 40 or 50 years of age. And in fact, that's the more rare case. But it's this delicate instrument that keeps the rest of the population from being morbidly obese at a relatively early age that's broken in Prader-Willi syndrome. What it turns out, if you do the arithmetic, remember I said it's only 5 pounds per year. Most people who are a little overweight, in fact, their calorie excess is only about 25 pounds, or 25 calories, or 5 calories. So this apostat is an incredibly delicate instrument, and you want to keep it at 0. So that's where we get the ideas for how to provide a low-calorie diet for people with Prader-Willi syndrome. On the website, actually, of the USA Prader-Willi site, you'll find this food pyramid. And you'll notice at the bottom of the food pyramid, unlike the food pyramid that the agricultural department puts out for all of us, is fruits and vegetables. And that is the bulk, literally the bulk, of what our children should receive. The next group are the fruits and the grains, because basically they have no fat content, but there are calories in there. And then you have the milk group, and the meat poultry group. And then finally, at the top of the pyramid, meaning the smallest amount, used very sparingly, is anything that contains sugar or fat. So this has been called and is used as the red, yellow, green diet. And this diet has been very, very effective in helping to educate the children as to what to expect. And I will talk later about the importance that their expectations match what's actually going to happen. So we aren't educating them on the diet so that they can manage their weight, because, as anyone here knows, that's not going to happen. But we do educate them on the diet so that their expectations are the same as what actually happens. And this is the way this diet might look for an individual who's getting 600 calories a day in order to lose weight. And you can see that they are presented with lots and lots of food. And one of the tricks I think that you might want to keep in mind when you're working with your child is make sure that when you sit down to eat and when he sits down to eat, he's got more food than you. And this is something that pleases them no end. Now, there are a number of reasons why this is so effective. And I will talk about those later on in the food, just later on. Okay, are there side effects to this diet? None that we know of. However, we do recommend a multivitamin with minerals. Mainly, we're looking for iron. There should be a calcium supplement for other reasons. One, there is going to be some limitation on milk products, and also because people with Prader-Willi syndrome do seem to be prone to thin bones. And then, this is my personal recommendation. I don't have any research to back this up, but I strongly recommend fish oil, say 3 grams per day would be a reasonable amount, 2 to 3 grams pills. And the reason for that is that fish oil, we now know, provides some molecules that are very important in the brain, and they have actually been correlated with benefits to mood stability, and we all want mood stability. And I think that 10, 20, 30 years on this very low-fat diet is really a setup for our Prader-Willi individuals to have a deficit in the omega-3 fatty acids that are provided by fish oil. Okay, let's go back to weight management. Energy in, energy out. And let's go back to the hypotonia. How are these related? The muscle mass is reduced. It's about 85% of normal. Doesn't seem like that should make such a big difference, huh? Well, the amount of calories that you burn just sitting there are different, and it's largely depending on your muscle mass. And that's why men can always eat more than women. That's why, as we get older and our muscle mass decreases, we have to cut back on the calories taken in or increase what we put out, which is pretty hard to do when you're 65 or 70. And the main thing is to keep in mind when you're thinking about Prader-Willi syndrome is that calorie needs are based on muscle mass, and the muscle mass, so far, even with growth hormone, appears to be reduced. And I've done some arithmetic similar to the arithmetic I showed you before, and the person with Prader-Willi syndrome, instead of having an excess of maybe 25 or 50 calories, I think it starts probably at least 100 to 300 calories per day, that they will have an excess just eating a normal diet. Okay, this is without any food foraging or any kind of spectacular food behaviors. Just eating a normal diet, they are going to pick up 100, 200 calories per day. And the problem with that is that over a year then, they can easily pick up 10 to 20 pounds, and you can't do that for very long because you very quickly become morbidly obese. So the other part of the equation, besides restricting calories going in, is to burn some more calories and also to build up the muscle mass to the extent that we can. And that's where exercise comes in. Exercise is a big part of this. And there's a way to do exercise with people with Prader-Willi syndrome. First place, because you want the individual to be expecting to exercise, you need to do this pretty much every day. If you want to have a holiday each week that you can work around for especially busy days, 6 days per week makes good sense. I strongly recommend walking. People are always asking me about exercise machinery and, you know, what kind of sophisticated exercise machinery should we get. Walking, indoors or outdoors, is desirable. Remember, you can go to malls if the food court isn't open yet, or we'll talk about how to deal with that later. Walking's safe because, one, you can't fake it. All right? You're either walking or you're not walking. Unlike an exercise cycle where people with Prader-Willi syndrome sometimes go in slow motion. Now, I will tell you that some individuals have done very well on exercise cycles, but in general, walking is the preferred reason, the preferred method. The other reason that walking is good is it doesn't take a lot of coordination. And that's one reason I veer away from treadmills. Now, you can use a treadmill, but the temptation to turn the speed up a little bit too high is there. It should really never be more than about 2 miles an hour. Because, again, people with Prader-Willi syndrome, especially, we think, individuals with disomy, tend to be a little awkward, have a little bit of problem figuring out where they are in space. And the last thing you need is a broken ankle. And we do see a lot of broken ankles. And it's that clumsiness plus the extra weight, plus the clumsiness also comes from the weak muscles, and finally the possibly weakened bones. So we do see a lot of fractures, and I tend to veer away from treadmills unless you start out very slowly, very carefully, maybe working with a physical therapist to decide. The other thing is you never expect a person with Prader-Willi syndrome to go exercise. You always will have to exercise with that individual. And some group homes have trouble understanding this or finding staff who are prepared to do the exercise. And for individuals who need to lose weight, this is going to be an hour a day of walking. Swimming is not a good substitute because, again, you can sort of float around and fool around. And swimming laps is great, but most people cannot burn enough calories or swim laps efficiently and effectively enough to burn the calories they need to burn. So all of the other things like biking, swimming, hiking, well, hiking is walking, but a lot of these other things are great adjuncts, but you do that after they've done their daily walk. The last is food control. The food-seeking behavior is all over the board. For a period of about a year, I did a little scale of food-seeking behaviors with all of my patients. And I found that some patients, it was a rare patient who didn't have some food-seeking behavior, and there were some patients who were just almost off the scale. That is, they had done everything that I had ever heard of anyone doing. And I know a family that has more than one individual with Prader-Willi syndrome in the family. And this is very interesting to me because we know that the children have the same genetic defect. There are 3 children in this family. And one of the children is a notorious food seeker who has done absolutely everything that anyone has ever reported to me. And the other 2 were really kind of opportunistic food seekers. You know, you leave something out, yes, it'll be gone. But they didn't go breaking locks and out foraging. It was very interesting right in the same family. So the variation with this syndrome is huge. And what I'm saying about food seeking is true for everything else, too. So all of them will, if these behaviors are reinforced, and that's an important part, all of them will try asking for more and whining and crying for food. Most of them will sneak food in the home if given the opportunity, or lie to manipulate to get food. However, it's a different kind of thing when somebody actually will steal outside the home. A lot of people are restrained. They will steal at school and at home, but they wouldn't go up to a stranger and take food. But there have been cases of breakage and entry, phoning out for food. Someone used a credit card number and ordered food over the internet. breaking locks, stealing keys, dismantling doors. Some folks obviously have very good visual perceptual skills. Running away to find food, although I think a lot of running away is impulsive, and then as long as I'm out here, I think I'll find an ice cream store. Pushing, shoving, destroying things, or actually getting aggressive about food is really pretty uncommon. What should be done to control food? And this is an important question, especially for providers who have to deal with human rights committees and people usually, as you go up your administrative ladder, the people farther and farther up who have more power to make decisions also know less and less about the syndrome. Because the answer to that question is whatever it takes. We cannot allow these individuals to suffocate from their own obesity. We think of food control as a zone defense and a man-to-man defense. The zone defense is what you're doing in your homes. You may be using locks. Not everyone needs to. And I will again talk about later some of my thoughts about why that's needed. And you need rules about where the individual is allowed to be, and the rules for the family about where they are allowed to have food. The school has to have rules about where food is allowed in the school and where the child is allowed in the school. And the child has to have rules about where he's allowed to be and when he's allowed to be there. When you go outside the zone, which is your home or the school, where everyone is sort of geared up for this zone defense, then you have to go to man-to-man. And man-to-man means that there is one person responsible for supervising that individual, and that person can hand it off to someone else. But what doesn't work is, oh, everyone's keeping an eye on him. That, I can tell you, doesn't work. If everyone is watching, no one is watching. So there has to be one person, and, you know, I've got them now, and half an hour later, okay, do you have them? Because I'm going to the bathroom. So that you have to have that kind of structure, and that's whenever the child is outside of your zone.